What happened? All right, well, welcome to the 25th day of Career Connect at Home. I'm Sarah Shearer, and today we'll be talking with Delmas Whittaker and Jorah Sol about maritime careers. There'll be time at the end of our session for you guys to ask questions, and you can put questions in the chat. You can also go to Career Connect at Home Instagram page to submit your questions. So we will get started. Hi.
Hi.
Delmas. And let me go. Hi, Jill. Hi, Delmas. I'm so grateful that you guys are doing this. So the maritime industry in general is anything that is on the water or supports the water. That'd be fair to say, yeah?
Yeah.
So all of us have had really interesting careers in the maritime industry. So I just wanted to start by first, Delmas, what's your role right now? What's your title and how long have you been doing what you're doing?
Okay. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Delmas Whittaker, and I am the Senior Manager for Fishing and Commercial Vessels at the Port of Seattle. In short, that means that I currently have the responsibility of managing the home of the North Pacific Fishing Fleet Fisherman's Terminal here on the north end of Seattle. And I also have in my portfolio is we also have a recreational marina with 170 slips, which is Salmon Bay Marina, which is one of our newest acquisitions. And also another older facility that we procure from the Coast Guard, which is the Maritime Industrial Center, which is a little further to the west of Fisherman's Terminal. So that's my role. And I've been with the port for about 12 years. I kind of started my career with the Port of Seattle at the airport at SeaTac International Airport, where I served as the logistics manager and small works manager for the aviation maintenance department.
Cool. Well, thanks. Jill, who are you? What do you do?
Yeah.
How long have you been doing it?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Jorah Sol, and I'm a deputy marine pilot in Southeast Alaska. And it's taken me about 30 years in the maritime industry to get to this point of being a pilot, which means that I started sailing on ships, worked my way up to captain. And in 2015, so 5 years ago, I took a big exam and got accepted into the Southeast Alaska pilot training program. And that's 4 years. So it was like getting another college degree. And I got licensed in 2019, and I had a fantastic summer 2019 as a pilot, which means any ship that came into Southeast Alaska waters, I would go on board and take over navigation and ship handling from the captain and crew, and worked as a team really to safely get these ships through kind of the complicated waters that we have in Southeast Alaska. And so this summer, because of COVID-19, I'm in my home in a small town in Washington and waiting for my little segment of the industry to pick back up again. We still have cargo, but no cruise ships this summer.
Yeah. So one of the cool things that you can do working on ships or working in the maritime industry, but specifically at sea, is you can live anywhere.
That's very true. I live in the small town of Winthrop, Washington. I'd be really curious to know if we had any students from Winthrop or Twist on here right now. And I chose to live here. I used to live in Seattle because I used to work at Fisherman's Terminal, as a matter of fact, Delmas. And but then once I got into the pilots program in Southeast Alaska, I worked 4 months a year. I worked mid-May to mid-September, very intense 4 months. And then I get the rest of the year off and I get to live where I want. And I love Eastern Washington. So we moved out here earlier this year.
Cool. And I was remiss and forgot to introduce myself. So I am Sarah Shearer, and right now I am the Maritime and Manufacturing Advocate to the Office of Economic Development for the City of Seattle. So basically, I describe myself as a double agent. I represent the maritime industry to the city and help the city understand how important the maritime industry and the manufacturing industry is. And then I represent the city to those industries and helping them understand these industries, understanding what the city does and why they make the decisions that they do. And if they're having issues or problems within their business, I try to help them navigate the twists and turns of the city.
A translator and connector.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
So it's been really good. So I started off in the maritime industry. I actually didn't know that I wanted to be in the maritime industry and didn't know that I wanted to drive ships for a living. I thought I wanted to work with dolphins. Of course, dolphins are it's a horrible analogy, but it's funny. It's the gateway drug to going to sea.
That's right.
Because you think, you want to work with mammals and all that stuff. And I ended up going to Texas Maritime Academy, which is one of the 4-year maritime academies where you can get a bachelor's degree and learn how to drive ships at the same time. So during my first biology class, I realized that I didn't want to cut up fish for 4 years. So it just wasn't my gig to do that. So I ended up studying oceanography and also learning how to drive ships and navigate and safety. And every summer we went out either on training ships and were what they call a cadet, like a student out at sea, or you went out on a commercial, you went on the school training ship with all your friends, basically, or you go on a commercial vessel and learn and actually be out there with folks who are professional mariners. So Delmas, what education pathway did you go to get where you're at?
Well, the majority of I graduated from high school in Reno, Nevada, and I didn't have a job, but my mom says you got your choices. You got 5 good choices: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. Your choice. And my stepbrother was in the Navy, and he says, "Why don't you join the Navy with me?" And I was like, "Well, sure, no problem. I'm not doing anything this weekend." So I joined the Navy, and I decided to join the same designation as he did as a gunner's mate. And so I was an enlisted sailor as a gunner's mate. My first tour of duty was on an aircraft carrier, the USS Kitty Hawk. And I was a little all over the place. So I wasn't really as committed at that particular point. So I did my first tour, got out of the Navy, decided I was going to join the real world. But a year later, I came back. The real world was too much for me. So I came back to the Navy and found a home working in the gun and launcher, large guns and missile launcher repair programs, and helped to build and repair things in a shipyard environment. The Navy was happy with my work, and they decided to send me to a destroyer where I could be qualified to work on destroyers, gun system on a destroyer. And I always had some great leaders, and just as you guys probably have great teachers and mentors, and I had folks around me that were always interested, and as long as I was interested in doing good, they were always interested in helping me do good. And so those folks helped me to rise to the rank of Chief Petty Officer, and I was interested in moving on to the officer community. So in 1994, I was commissioned as a naval officer. Got my butter bars, and they sent me off to do great things in Yokosuka, Japan, where I had the opportunity. Well, first I was a law enforcement officer, a law enforcement specialist while I was still in enlisted ranks, but I did have the opportunity to manage a lightweight torpedo facility and for intermediate maintenance for lightweight torpedoes and run a whole ammunition facility as a second in command there in Yokosuka, Japan. But I cut my teeth on an aircraft carrier. So I decided to strike off to get my surface warfare qualifications on an aircraft carrier, 104-ton displacement vessel, 2 nuclear powered reactors, and now they carry about 90 aircraft. That was a little more than what I did that they had to be when I was on board. But yeah, so I got to be my ship handling on an aircraft carrier.
So say a little bit more about what a surface warfare officer, what does that mean?
Well,
students may not know.
Sure. So just like a pilot gets qualified to understand all the aspects of flying and the science of flying a vessel, an aircraft, a surface warfare officer has a responsibility not only to learn how to drive ships, but also has an intimate knowledge of battle tactics or warfighting techniques, different aspects, different pieces of or an array of armament, and understanding all of the components, not only of his or her ship, but also of radar systems, navigation, and leadership. You need to know how to do that, and also obviously engineering. And being on an aircraft carrier with nuclear powered reactors, man, I tell you, just talking to folks about protons, neutrons, I suffered through a lot, but it builds character.
That's right. So one of the things I want to highlight is all this is, when you're in high school, I remember literally sitting in my trigonometry class in school. I'm going to take off my glasses and literally sitting like this. I am never going to use trig. This is ridiculous. Why would I have to learn this? And 4 years later, I ended up at a maritime academy learning navigation, and navigation is all trig. And it's so much easier when it's actually applied, when you're actually doing something with it, rather than this random set of, that you're just like, it doesn't make any sense. But when you're actually using it, it makes a lot of sense. So I can imagine that, the protons and the neutrons, and you're like, oh my God, science, what am I doing out on this ship?
Hey, and so I'm a share a little secret now. I hope this is just between us.
Just the three of us.
I was not your top student, okay? But you know what? The one thing I will credit to the Navy is that it showed me that, hey, listen, if you put your heart and you put effort into anything, anything's possible. Yeah. And I literally did not finish my degree until I was in my early 50s.
Oh, good for you.
So I don't get me wrong, I took a lot of college, but I just didn't settle on one thing. So I tell you, I feel extremely fortunate for the career that I have. When Sarah talks about trig, just imagine the guy that didn't pay attention in trig, or pay attention. And so I was very creative about how I did certain things, but I wish I would have probably paid more attention in those times. But still, again, I had some great mentors, and I had some great folks that had confidence that I could be successful at what I'm doing.
That's awesome. Jill, I'm going to ask you the same question in just a second, but in the chat box, somebody said, well, how much do maritime jobs pay? So one of the reasons why maritime is really great right now is because the average pay of the maritime worker is about $67,000 a year. The average pay of just in Washington in general is $52,000 a year. So
Mhm.
that's almost $12,000 more.
Mhm.
So the average pay and there are lots of different places that you can enter the maritime industry. So you don't have to have a 4-year degree like I did.
Mhm.
There's different trainings that you can do. You can get into welding in 6 months. You can go to sea without getting any training. It's a little bit better if you do have a little bit of training, but there's lots of different things that you can do in lots of different places. So Jill, what was your educational pathway? And they have a specific question about the exam and
Oh, my pilot exam.
your
Yeah.
pilot exam.
Yeah.
And how hard is it to get into pilot school,
Yeah.
and what do you have to study?
Yeah. Well, I want to touch back on, I want to make sure I also hit that pay question just really quickly.
Yeah.
You know, the maritime industry really is one of the few industries where you really can start from very inexperienced, right out of high school, work hard. And it looks a little different working hard in the maritime industry than it does maybe in an office job. And we can talk about that. But work hard, and then you can continuously upgrade your license and your position, and your pay increases with that. And it's one of the few, I would say, areas of work, and you'll know the statistic better than me, Sarah, but I mean, you could literally go from high school graduation to 5, 6 years later, you could be making over $100,000 a year if you're in a certain segment of the maritime industry. I don't think
For
that's
sure.
much of an exaggeration. Again, though, everything has to kind of line up, but the potential is there. And because it's an essential service, we see that it is less affected. Certain aspects of the maritime industry are less affected by things like this completely random pandemic that has shut down other sectors of industry. And so you're really kind of future proofing your employment in the maritime industry, which I think is really important to touch on, which is why the pay is good, because number one, the job is hard. And number two, they're asking you to do something that not the average person is willing to do, right? So, you know, you're going to be asked to go out to sea for any length of time. If you're in the sailing part of the maritime industry, obviously there's a lot of different segments, but if we want to talk about just going out to sea, you're going to be out to sea from, Sarah, you told me the other day, like your longest stretch out at sea was like 6 weeks or something like that without seeing land. My longest was like 40 something days, so a little bit shy of that. And then you come home and you're home for 2, 3, 5, 6 weeks, depending, and then you go right back out again. And it's a very particular style of life. And if it suits you, it will treat you very well. So now how I got into this is also not typical. Like I really want to stress that you do not have to get into this the way that I did it or the way that Sarah or Delmas did. You can get into it straight from high school. Going to a trade school, I do recommend you get some experience. You have to have some minimal training just to be qualified from a safety standpoint to go out to sea. So I did not fall in love with dolphins when I was a child. I was in love with horses.
Oh.
So bear with me.
Okay.
So I was in love with horses, and in high school, I was pretty sure I was going to be a veterinarian. And I was college prep, therefore college prep, and I knew I was going to be a vet. So I went to Oregon State University, which has a strong veterinary medicine school. And I had done really well in high school. And then I got to college and took biology and chemistry and did not very well. And I was paying, my parents are very, they wanted to make sure that I understood the value of a dollar. So I was actually paying for my own college education and kind of wasting it. And I was like, what am I going to do? And so I was just randomly taking classes. Literally, I was opening up the admissions book, and I found a geography 101 class, which was maps and map making. And I got my first A ever in college in this class. And I just felt like this, like, oh my gosh, I get it. I understand surveying, I understand maps and map making. I was really fascinated by land features and water features and why they were where they were and how people kind of fit into it. So I ended up studying that and getting my 4-year degree in geography. And then I went from college to an engineering firm, and I was doing flood hazard boundary mapping, sitting behind a drafting table, you know, and all of a sudden I was an office worker and hated it. I just hated it. And so I actually was going to join the Navy because my entire family is from the Navy. Yeah, exactly. Like I believe you and I talked about this. My entire family, they're all naval aviators though, which is a very different subset, right, of the Navy. And I talked to my dad, who had just retired from the Navy, and this is the 80s. So it was a very different time. It was a different time for women, especially in the service. And not all the line items were open, right? So women couldn't serve on ships yet. They couldn't actually be pilots of combat aircraft. There was not as much to do. But I talked to my dad and I said, I think I'm going to join the Navy. And Dad's like, no, you don't want to do that because then you're going to just have another office job. And he said, but I had flown with these officers in this really weird other service called the NOAA Corps. And it's a uniform service, and there's 7, and of course we have, as you had mentioned, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and we have the Public Health Service. If you've seen the Surgeon General wear a uniform, that's one of those 7 uniform services, and the very teeny tiny NOAA Corps. And Sarah and I actually share that background, which is pretty cool. It's basically scientists in uniform, and its genesis was actually. Lewis and Clark were essentially NOAA Corps officers sent out by Jefferson, so there's a real historical foundation of science and service, and it really appealed to me, coming from a family that service was such a big part of our dogma growing up. And so I joined the NOAA Corps. I got in and had 90 days of training, and boom, I got stuck on a ship, and I was like, port, starboard. Okay, I got that, but that was about it. And I got a lot of training on there. And what I discovered while I was doing this science was that I loved being at sea. And that was this moment that took 4 years for me to realize. I was in the Corps for about 4 years. And when I got reassigned from there, I was going to go do another office job in Seattle. I was going to go from the ship to an office job, basically looking at photographs of ice. And I just like, I just don't want to be on a ship. And I didn't really know much about the maritime industry, but I knew that there were these civilian ships that went all over the world. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to keep exploring. I wanted to be outside. I liked working hard for a finite length of time. Like, give me 30 days straight of hard work and then 30 days off that I can go play and hike and do whatever I want and then come back and do it again. And I got that in the maritime industry. So when I got out of the Corps, I studied for my first exam, which was not the pilot exam, and I got my mate's license. So that's just how, when you're a sailor in the maritime industry and you're a merchant mariner, and the Coast Guard is kind of like our DMV for ships. They're the ones who give us our licenses. And they looked at my sea time and they said, okay, you can sit for this license as a mate. And that's it. You can be a mate of this size vessel. Then you sail on that for a while and you get experience. And then you go back and you say, can I have a bigger one? And they go, sure. Okay, we're going to give you this mate license and this master's license. And that's a fancy way of saying captain. And everybody wants to be captain, but captain actually has a lot harder job. So don't be in a hurry to be a captain if you join the maritime industry. So then I went, I was a mate and I loved being a mate. And then finally, I was about 8 years into the maritime industry and I got my first captain's job. I was working on a small passenger vessel, industry ship. So my job was to take guests out into Alaska, which is how I got introduced into Alaska, and the Sea of Cortez down in Mexico. And so we bring these passengers on, and I got paid to show them glaciers and bears and whales. It was amazing. And I did that for quite a while, and I went back and forth between small passenger vessel ships and research ships, and because I still liked going out and discovering new things. So I think we lost Sarah, but Delmas, I bet you and I can kind of keep it going here for a bit. And so I just kept taking, I'm getting to my pilot exam. So I kept taking a series of exams. And I think I probably ended up taking 3 to upgrade to my, my master's license. And then when I finally had enough sea time to qualify to be a pilot, which was, I probably could have taken the test with about 15 years in, but it's a really, really difficult field to study. It's considered the pinnacle as a mariner to be a pilot, and you're a much better pilot with more experience. So I'm glad I waited a little bit. I studied for about a year to take the test, and because they asked me in this exam, they asked me questions about ship handling and navigation and environmental regulations and being a good watch keeper, what does that mean, and how to use a radar, all this electronic equipment. And so I just kept working at it and studying, and I took the test, took a written test, and then they put you in a simulator, and they basically, it looks like the inside of a ship. You're on the bridge, and just like a really cool video game, and they start throwing situations at you, and you have to respond really well. And then once you get to the point where you are, you think that you should go be a waiter because you've totally screwed up. They said, no, actually this exam was really hard. You did well. You get invited into the training program, and then that's another 4 years. So it's like getting another degree. But at the end of that 4 years, my job was, there's no better job in the world. I climb up a little ladder, I get on a cruise ship, and I get handed a latte. I take over the navigation of a ship, and I go show them glaciers, and I go show them whales. And the biggest thing that I'm proud of, though, is not that, but my job is to keep the waters of Alaska pristine. I'm an environmentalist. My job is to protect the waters of Southeast Alaska. And I'm really proud of that. And, I just happen to do it in the most beautiful and pristine area that there is. So there you go, Sarah. I see that you're back with us now.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool job. It's, yeah, it's worth everything to get here. It really is. And I don't want to lie about the journey, because it was a journey. And, but like you had said, Delmas, the harder you work, right? And you find those people, those who are willing to mentor you. And, you just, as long as you have that constant kind of, you want to learn constantly, right? Like that's how you get to the pinnacle of any profession, not just the maritime industry, but certainly in our industry, is that you don't stop learning. You just be lifelong learners. And it's amazing to me. I got into the pilots with 25 years of experience, and I thought I knew this much, and I knew this much about ship handling and navigation. And it was just blew my mind that there was so much more to learn and apply. And now I it's awesome. I'm not gonna say superhero, but I feel really, really cool about that journey and what I do now. It's pretty neat.
Well, Jill, I'm gonna give you some quick kudos. Is that when I drove an aircraft carrier and we were conducting restricted maneuverings coming out of San Diego or
That's
through
no joke stuff.
There you go. And so it was always pretty nice to have one of those really skilled and masterful pilots that were sitting next to, standing next to me as I may be the conning officer, driving the vessel out. And it obviously gave me a level of confidence, and our skipper good confidence that we weren't going to tap the rocks. And
That's right.
That could be a little career ending.
Yeah, that's not the best day.
No, that's not. So it was really a thrill. So
hey everyone, this is Julia from the Career Connected Home team. Sarah, I think, is having a little technical difficulties, so I thought I'd just jump in and moderate us through the next couple of minutes. We had a couple of questions coming in. Maybe Delmas, do you want to take, what advice would you give a high schooler who's interested in a maritime career?
Wow, that's I kind of told on myself early that said that I really didn't have the best of the direction when I made my decision to join the Navy. But what I will tell you is this: is that keep your eyes open. You obviously have those goals and those aspirations, but the one thing I think that that served me well throughout my beginning years, my first 4 years in the Navy, where you're really cutting your teeth on getting used to being on sea, being at sea, living in cramped quarters, eating food. Uh, you know, I'm not gonna say it was most gourmet stuff, and
Yeah.
but or being separated from family and friends for days, weeks, months. Is that I really had to keep an open mind and really be willing to learn, where your comfort zone is. Jill talks about where her comfort zone was and what made her comfortable doing what she was doing. For in preparation for this conversation today, I was trying to outline how many different jobs I had.
Yeah.
I got up to 27. And
Wow.
so, and to me, all of those were career opportunities. Now, most people will tell you, there's no way you were able to do those things. Yep. I did them all, and did them all for long periods of time, and either actually as a technician or as a supervisor. But you know what? It was being open to learn something new all the time. It doesn't have to be a bunch of things. It could be one, two, just be open-minded. And now you're going to focus in on something. And you know what? Then you start to get your mentors. You start to, get that extra training. You start to lay your plan out. But I'm sure there's just in the beginning, it's just a lot going on, and so, but the life at sea is different from anything anybody else can imagine. It's different. I'm 110 days in the Indian Ocean.
You win.
There you go. I had to throw that one out there. I was like, oh yeah, I spent 110 days at Gonzo Station. That was great. But you know what? I survived. And you know what? I come out on the back end. I'm the better for it. It was a great opportunity. So.
What are some jobs, Delmas, that people do in the maritime industry that like in Seattle or in the state? Like people who, if they don't go to Alaska, are there jobs that people do locally, like at Fisherman's Terminal where you're based?
Oh, absolutely. So some of the skills that we have here, obviously I manage the moorage side of the house. So I have my harbor operations specialist that help maintain and keep our docks managed and making sure all the equipment, the electrical stations, our power stations, our moorage dock locations are in good working order for the vessels that will tie up here, that they have the ability to connect with water and even just like we have right now outside my window. You can't see it right now, but outside my window, I have a dozen or so fishermen that are out repairing nets in our net repair yard, and they need these 10,000-pound nets to be moved around and placed on their vessels. So my folks operate forklifts and other heavy equipment to be able to reposition that material to make it possible for those folks to go out and do their business. Now, then on the other side, for those that want to work the office, obviously I have a business operations manager that manages communicating with the fishers, sales, finances, helps me with my strategic vision for capital development here on the facility and building, where we're putting up new facilities or just repairing old facilities. this is 100-plus-year-old facility that requires a lot of TLC. And so with that, we have to make some hard choices to keep it functional. And so, and then I have a real estate manager who has businesses that are here, that manages the various businesses that folks, the business offices, the restaurants, the barber shops, you name it, and last but not least, we have a maintenance department. And our maintenance department consists of multiple labor trades that provide services, from electricians to millwrights, folks that are doing carpentry, that are doing woodwork. We have painters. I have machinists. I have auto mechanics that maintain the fleet vehicles that we have here. So there's a number of different things that that they do to help keep this facility operational.
Wow. And Jill, we had a question come in about what it's like to drive a boat when you're in kind of complicated waters. Like, what does that look like? What are you thinking about? What are you worried about? Do you use any particular skills when you're doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I kind of define complicated. There's like different types of complicated waters. One type of complicated water is just being out in the ocean in a storm. That can be very complicated. You have to really judge, like, how strong is your vessel? How fast am I going? What's the pressure on me from a commercial standpoint to get this ship into port? How much can I push the ship? These are big questions, because you don't want to put anybody in danger. And so you're always reading the sea. You're always looking at weather reports and talking to weather forecasters on shore and trying to get the best route. And making that decision is, it weighs heavily on you. You want to make sure, there's a very real commercial pressure, right, to get your ship to where it needs to be. But then you also get complicated waters like I'm dealing with now up in Southeast Alaska when I take a cruise ship up to a glacier. There's ice that falls off of the glacier, and this ice can be really thick. And we all probably heard of a little boat called the Titanic, right? None of us want to be that. And so, that's nerve-wracking from a very acute standpoint, right? Like, out in a storm, it just wears you down. But when you're like driving up at this glacier, you're just, and you can't just turn, because think of ships not like cars that go like this and then turn. Ships slide in the water. So if you're an iceberg here and I'm turning, I got to watch the stern too of a 1,000-foot vessel. I got to make sure that my butt doesn't swing around this corner and hit it. So you're kind of always thinking three-dimensionally and spatially. And so any high schoolers out there who find like they can put together like three-dimensional puzzles or think kind of spatially about things, we tend to find that mariners are better ship handlers if they think that way, if they think about relative motion. And when you're merging onto a highway, what is your speed relative to the other car? Like, if you can imagine that, like, relative motion is a huge part of ship handling, whether you're dealing with another ship or going to a dock or trying to navigate through ice. And so, you're taking all of these things that you've learned, not just actually sitting in school, but life lessons, and you're applying them in some of these situations. So
that's awesome.
Hey, Julie, can I comment on that one too? Because you just made me want to share a cool story. An aircraft carrier operating in, say, the Straits of Hormuz, where we have folks that are doing their bidding and launching and recovering aircraft. As Jill pointed out, there's definitely a lot of dynamics that happen with just navigating the water. Mm-hmm. Now put about 40 aircraft in the air, and you're having, because to launch those aircraft, you have to have certain wind speeds, and to recover those aircraft, you have to have certain wind speeds. And sometimes the wind doesn't always want to work for you. So you have to adjust ship's course to be able to get the right wind angle, right wind speed. You got to get the right speed on the engines. You've got to make sure that you're not running aground or hitting an oil well that is an inactive well somewhere. And also you have these marshaling areas that are above you that you don't want to put your aircraft into other people's airspace. Mm-hmm. So as you said, there's a lot of things that are happening, when you're navigating, for me, an aircraft carrier. But the one thing I'll tell you that I always relied on is the officer deck on board an aircraft carrier. For me, is I relied on my team. I had a watch officer, my junior officer of the watch. I had my conning officer, and I also had a bridge team of, quartermaster and tactical operations folks they had my back. And so I'll never take for granted the work that those folks were doing around the scenes to help give me the right situational awareness to be able to make good decisions. And so, and at one point I was part of that team, not just the guy making a decision. So as I was saying, being open to learning those stations helped me to be a better problem solver. And so as you guys kind of go through your learning process, that sometimes we have to rely on the people around us to be able to help us navigate the way. So yeah. Team for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a team effort.
Yeah.
Sarah, we probably got time for about one more question. I've got one in the hopper, but I just wanted to check, Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to be sure to get in before we close? Oh, Sarah, hold on. You're on mute. Hang on.
Okay.
There we go. Now we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. One of the questions that I thought was really great before I pull out, and you may have already asked it, but was the coolest place that you've ever been? Did you already ask that one?
Not yet. I was saving that to close on just in case.
Okay. Well, good. I'll start with a couple of mine. One of them was an island called Palmyra, which was the coolest, like the bluest water you could possibly see. I got to spend a lot of time in around the Northwest Hawaiian Islands and then down into American Samoa. Actually, this picture behind me is fabric, that's paper that they make and then they paint. So American Samoa was amazing, and Samoa. I actually got to, the captain and I, when I was a NOAA Corps officer that Jill kind of talked about, I was the executive officer, and we were off the coast of the Big Island in Hawaii, and there was active lava flowing into the ocean, and we took the ship as close as we both were standing there like, can we move? Is that it? Is that as far as we can go? And both really nervous, but I mean, it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen, because it's actually the earth being formed. It's like hot magma coming out from the center and forming an island. So that was one of the coolest things I ever saw.
Oh, that's awesome. Jill, coolest place you've been on a ship?
They're all cool. They're all cool. There's no bad days at sea. I would say a lot of mine happen on research ships as well, similar to Sarah. So I've been to Antarctica a couple of times, and it's just otherworldly. It's just, you can't even describe it. And I got a chance to travel to the Soviet Union when it was still the Soviet Union and work with Russian scientists around the northern part of Siberia. And I also have like this Earth Genesis story. I was working on a research ship down in the Southern Ocean and between kind of New Zealand and Australia. And I was walking down this passageway, and a scientist has a beaker full of water. And he comes up to me and he's like, smell this. And I'm like, dude, I was not born yesterday. No, I'm not smelling anything. And he says, no, it's sulfur. And he pulled the cap. And I was like, it was sulfur. So we had happened to do a basically a water collection, for lack of a better way to describe it. We're a brand new volcano, previously undiscovered. And we were the first ones to document it. It actually ended up on CNN. And it was like this thing, like a year later, it's now out of the water and it's a new island. And it was just amazing. I didn't know I was anywhere, and yet I'm going to call it the coolest place I ever was.
That's so cool. Delmas, you want to take us home? Coolest place you've ever been? Last comment.
Oh, okay. I know nobody's mentioned it. I was hoping somebody would say sailing in to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii was one of the most beautiful, sweet smelling. Normally you went there as you're getting ready to go to deployment and you're coming home. So that was great. I did have a wonderful experience. Well, my most interesting and coolest navigation detail has to be sailing into Hong Kong. Why? Because there are a lot of ships and those junks are all over the place, and you got this big vessel coming in, absolutely crazy. And then as Jill talks about those pristine waters, the Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean, as we went to the Seychelles to drop the hook there, absolutely beautiful. Just emerald colored waters. You could just see for just hundreds of feet, and it was just beautiful, and white sandy beaches, and just wonderful experiences. So yeah, never a bad day at sea.
Well, thank you guys so much. We're out of time, but I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the panel and talk to our students. For everybody watching, come back tomorrow at 3:30. We will have NanoString, a biotechnology company that's going to talk about how they work to cure diseases like COVID-19 with computers and robots and artificial intelligence. So tune back in tomorrow for the next day. And thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That was awesome.